The sea roared beneath the starless sky. The cold wind lashed the water's surface, forming violent ripples that crashed against dark rocks. A large metal barrel, rusted and partially submerged, spun aimlessly in the unpredictable currents. It creaked with every jolt, tossed from side to side like a dry leaf in the wind. Inside it, Bailey, a golden Labrador, used her body to shield her puppies from the intense cold. Buddy, Molly, and Finn, still so small, huddled against her, trembling as their fragile bodies pressed tightly together. Their short, uneven breaths betrayed the fear that grew with every new sway of the barrel. Bailey kept her wide eyes fixed in the darkness, ears tuned to the ocean's sounds. The scent of rust and salt water filled her nostrils. She knew they had to hold on, but she couldn't understand why they had been thrown there to die. The last peaceful memory still lived vividly in her mind. Before everything happened, she had been at home, lying on the damp grass in the backyard, watching Michael, her loving owner, play with the puppies. He would call them with soft whistles, laughing when Finn tripped over his own paws while trying to catch up with his siblings. That scene felt like a distant dream now. Disaster came without warning. Bailey remembered the strange scent in the air. Freshly broken wood, fabric damp with sweat, heavy footsteps on the porch. Her instinct screamed that something was wrong even before the side door was forced open. The first intruder slipped in stealthily, holding a red-beamed flashlight that cast eerie shadows along the hallway. The second followed close behind, moving quickly. Their scent was unfamiliar, a mix of motor oil, metal, and leather. Bailey leaped in front of the puppy's makeshift bed, raising her snout and letting out a low growl. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. She would not hesitate to attack. But before she could lunge, a heavy blow struck her side. Pain exploded through her muscles, making her stumble. The impact was too precise, too deliberate to be accidental. Before she could recover, a thick net was thrown over her, pinning her paws against the floor. The puppies began to cry as they were pulled from their safe hiding spot. Finn tried to bite the fingers of the shorter man, but was roughly shoved into a burlap sack, which was soon tied tightly with a strong knot. Desperation surged in Bailey's chest as she was lifted effortlessly off the ground by the second intruder's strong arms. She struggled with everything she had, but the net kept her movements restrained. She heard Michael's footsteps racing down the hallway, his voice thick with panic. "Bailey!" His scream echoed through the yard just as the van's doors slammed shut. The engine roared, red taillights vanished around the corner, and Bailey understood that they were being taken far from home. The journey was long and uncomfortable. The van's floor was cold, metallic, and the vehicle's swaying made the sacks slide back and forth. Molly whimpered softly, probably trying to understand what was happening. The smell of gasoline filled the air. At some point, the engine was turned off and doors opened, allowing a gust of freezing wind to rush in, contrasting with the suffocating heat inside the vehicle. Bailey was yanked from the sack and thrown onto the rough ground of an abandoned port. The dim light of a flickering street lamp cast shadows over unfamiliar, indifferent faces. One of them held a clipboard and a cigarette, eyes narrowed. Rick Donovan, leader of a criminal organization profiting from dog trafficking. "This is taking too long." He exhaled smoke slowly. "The tide is rising. Get it done." Another man, more impatient, crossed his arms. "We should have finished this at the warehouse. This is too much trouble." Rick smirked. "Accidents happen." Without hesitation, the puppies were tossed into a metal barrel, handled carelessly. Molly let out a cry of protest. Bailey reacted with a fierce growl, but one of the men grabbed her by the collar, yanking it harshly. "Stay quiet." She fought against the pain in her neck, trying to break free, but they were faster. A forceful shove sent her into the barrel with the puppies. Her body slammed against the icy surface. The space was far too small. Bailey positioned herself as best as she could to shield her babies, but there was no escape. The lid snapped shut with a metallic clang. The sound of iron grinding against iron was the last thing she heard before feeling the barrel being pushed off the dock. The impact against the water was brutal. The barrel spun violently, sinking for a moment before being pulled back up by the current. The world became a whirlpool of darkness and cold. Water began to seep through tiny holes in the metal. Bailey pressed her body against the puppies, trying to keep them dry. But she knew time was against them. Alone, adrift in the endless ocean, the only certainty that remained was the need to survive. Hours passed, and the sun began to rise over the horizon. The barrel still floated, spinning slowly with the waves. Bailey's body ached, exhausted. The puppies were silent, their breathing shallow and spaced. There was no way to tell how much longer they could hold on. Then, a new sound broke through the air. Footsteps on wood. Voices. Something was approaching. Sophie was the first to notice the metallic object floating in the water. "Look at that!" Bailey's heartbeat quickened. Her half-closed eyes tried to focus on the golden light of dawn. Could this finally be a chance? The sun began to rise on the horizon, painting the sky in golden and orange hues. The morning breeze blew across the pier, carrying with it the salty scent of the sea. The sound of seagulls echoed over the damp wooden dock as the waters moved lazily, pushing small debris toward the shore. Sophie, Ethan, and Jake walked through the port, following the sandy path that led to the platforms where boats docked overnight. The three siblings often explored the area on weekends, searching for seashells or small treasures left behind by fishermen. Sophie, the most observant, suddenly stopped. Her gaze locked onto a large metal structure, swaying with the waves near the rocks. "Look at that," she said, pointing at the rusted object. Jake ran to the edge of the pier, leaning forward to get a better view. "What is that?" Ethan, older than the other two, watched carefully. The barrel spun slowly, pushed by the current, and one detail caught his attention: a muffled noise coming from inside the metal structure. "I think something is inside." Sophie stepped forward, her eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" A faint sound, almost imperceptible, escaped through the metal. It was a weak whimper, followed by small scratches on the inner surface. Jake stepped back, feeling a shiver run up his spine. "Something is trapped in there." Ethan didn't hesitate. "We need to get it out of the water." The siblings searched for something they could use to pull the barrel closer to the pier. After a few seconds, Ethan found a rope attached to an iron hook and threw it toward the metal object. The first toss missed, causing the rope's end to fall into the water. The second went over the barrel, sliding across the rusted surface. Sophie held her breath. More to the right. On the third throw, the hook's tip caught onto a small gap in the metal lid. Ethan pulled slowly, testing its grip, then nodded at his siblings. "Now pull with me." The three of them began pulling with all their strength, feeling the weight resisting in the water. The barrel seemed stuck on something, but with continuous effort, it started moving toward the pier. The metal creaked as it was dragged, until it finally ran aground on the rocks nearest to the shore. Sophie knelt beside it, her fingers running over the cold, wet surface. The muffled whimper was heard again. Someone was inside. "Quick, Ethan, we need to open this." Jake found a crowbar near the wooden crates left behind by fishermen. Without thinking twice, he grabbed the tool and handed it to his older brother. Ethan forced the crowbar's tip against the barrel's lid, pressing hard until he heard a loud crack. The lid shifted slightly, opening a small gap. Silence filled the air. The three siblings held their breath, hesitating for a moment. Then, a pair of wide brown eyes appeared in the opening. Sophie brought her hands to her mouth. "Oh my God! It's a dog!" Bailey blinked several times, trying to adjust her vision to the sunlight. The smell of rust still filled her nostrils, but the fresh air entering through the gap brought a breath of relief. She moved her body slowly, feeling her sore muscles and drenched fur. The puppies remained curled against her belly, their eyes half closed. Ethan pushed the lid further until it opened completely. Bailey stayed still for a few moments. Her brown eyes studied the unfamiliar faces in front of her. Sophie was the first to approach. "Hey girl, it's okay now." Bailey sniffed the air, trying to detect any sign of danger. Her maternal instinct screamed to protect the puppies, but something about these children radiated trust. Jake crouched beside his sister, observing the tiny figures huddled against their mother's belly. "They're puppies, and they look really weak." Sophie reached out carefully, touching Bailey's snout. The dog remained still for a moment, then surrendered to the gentle touch and closed her eyes for a few seconds. Ethan looked around, concerned. "We need help. If we stay here, they might get worse." Sophie stood up abruptly. "Jake, run to the harbor shop. Get someone." Without hesitation, Jake dashed off. The minutes felt like hours. Bailey was still trembling, but she allowed Sophie to help her out of the barrel. The puppies were too weak to walk, so Ethan picked up Molly, feeling the tiny warm body press against his jacket. The sound of hurried footsteps approached. Jake returned, accompanied by Tom, a harbor worker, who was carrying a thick blanket in his hands. Upon seeing the dogs, the man frowned and immediately knelt beside Bailey. "My God, who could do something like this?" Sophie wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her shirt. They were trapped in the barrel. The smallest one isn't responding very well. Tom pulled a thermos from his coat pocket and poured a bit of warm water into his palm, bringing it close to Molly's snout. The puppy opened her eyes slowly, licking the liquid with effort. Ethan held his breath. "Is she going to be okay?" Tom nodded. "If we warm them up quickly, their chances are good." Carefully, they wrapped Bailey and the puppies in dry blankets. The group made their way to the harbor shop, where Tom kept a small first aid area for animals. Bailey was placed on a cushioned surface, while the puppies were settled beside her. Sophie held the dog's paw, feeling the tiny movements of her fingers weaving into the wet fur. "You're safe now." Bailey looked at her and, for the first time since her nightmare began, gently wagged her tail. The siblings exchanged glances, a mix of relief and emotion on their young faces. Bailey and her puppy's story was far from over, but they were no longer alone. The warmth of the small heater filled the room, slowly dissipating the cold that had overtaken the drenched bodies. The salty scent of the sea still clung to Bailey's fur and that of the puppies, but the comfort of dry blankets and the tranquility of the improvised shelter finally allowed their bodies to relax. Sophie remained kneeling beside the dog, keeping her fingers intertwined with her paw. Ethan and Jake sat near the entrance, watching every movement closely. Tom left the room for a few minutes and returned carrying a bowl of fresh water and pieces of soft bread, placing the food within Bailey's reach. "She needs to regain her strength." Bailey lifted her head slightly and sniffed the food, but she didn't touch it immediately. Her brown eyes, still weary, scanned the surroundings as if searching for something more. There was still something missing. Sophie noticed the look and furrowed her brows. "What is it, girl?" "Everything is okay now." Bailey remained motionless. Her eyes conveyed longing, as if searching for someone who should be there. Tom sighed and crossed his arms. "I think this dog has an owner." Silence filled the room. Ethan looked at the puppies, who were now slightly more animated, then turned his attention back to Bailey. "If someone is waiting for her, we need to find out who it is." While Tom cared for the puppies, Sophie picked up an old cell phone that the man kept in the shop and started searching for recent news. After a few minutes, her eyes widened. "I found something." Ethan and Jake rushed over to look at the screen. A post made 2 days ago showed a picture of Bailey next to a worried-looking man. The text read, "My dog and her puppies have disappeared. Please, any information is important. They're part of my family." The name below the photo caught the siblings' attention. "Michael Williams," Ethan whispered. Sophie turned to Tom, gripping the phone tightly. "We need to call him." Tom picked up the shop's phone, dialed the number from the post, and waited. The phone rang 3 times before a male voice answered on the other end. "Hello?" Michael's anxiety was evident. Tom took a deep breath before responding. "Mr. Williams? My name is Tom. I'm calling because I think we found your dog and her puppies." The silence that followed was filled with emotion. "Are you serious?" "Yes. They're with me now." A noise came from the other end of the line, followed by hurried footsteps. "Tell me where they are." "I'm coming right now." Time seemed to drag on. Sophie kept her eyes fixed on the door, counting the seconds until the man arrived. Bailey, lying on the blanket, lifted her head slightly a few times, as if sensing that something important was about to happen. Then, hurried footsteps echoed outside. The shop door swung open forcefully, and a breathless man entered, his eyes scanning the room desperately. As soon as he spotted Bailey, his expression completely changed. "Bailey!" The sound of Michael's voice made the dog lift her head abruptly. Her eyes blinked a few times, as if trying to confirm whether this was real. For a few seconds, the world seemed to freeze. Then, Bailey jumped to her feet and ran to him, stumbling slightly from exhaustion. The impact of her body against Michael almost knocked him over. He fell to his knees, wrapping his arms tightly around her. "Girl, I thought I had lost you." Tears streamed down his face before he could stop them. The puppies, sensing the excitement, wobbled to their feet and ran after their mother. Finn was the first to reach Michael, trying to climb onto his lap with his still clumsy little paws. Michael laughed through his tears and picked them up in his arms, hugging each of them with tenderness. Sophie, Ethan, and Jake watched the scene with emotional smiles. Tom crossed his arms, satisfied. "I think we found their true home." After the emotional reunion, Michael recounted everything that had happened since Bailey and the puppies were taken. He explained how his house had been invaded, the way the criminals acted, and how everything happened so quickly that he had no time to react. Concerned, Tom picked up the phone again and contacted a local police officer he knew. "If this organization is behind it, we need to make sure no one else goes through this." Less than an hour later, a police car arrived at the location. Officer Carter, responsible for investigating animal crimes, stepped out of the vehicle and walked up to Michael. "We received your report. We will investigate immediately." With the information provided by Michael, the police began tracking down those responsible for the dog napping. The investigation led officers to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. There, they discovered several cages filled with dogs in poor condition, many of them valuable breeds, likely captured to be sold illegally. Rick Donovan, the leader of the criminal operation, was arrested as he attempted to flee through the back of the warehouse. His empire of cruelty had finally come to an end. When the news spread, many people celebrated the dismantling of the trafficking ring. Michael, now relieved, knew that other animals were safe thanks to the courage to report the crime. Days later, Michael returned to the harbor. This time, he was carrying a small bundle in his arms. Sophie, Ethan, and Jake were sitting on the dock, tossing small stones into the water when they heard approaching footsteps. "Hey guys!" They turned and saw Michael smiling at them. In his arms, a tiny ball of light-colored fur wiggled, peeking around with curious little eyes. Sophie's eyes widened. "It's Molly." Michael nodded. "You save her life. I think it's only fair that she stays with you." The siblings exchanged surprised glances. Ethan broke into a smile. "Really? We can keep her?" Michael chuckled. "Bailey and the others already have a home. But Molly needs a new beginning, and I don't think there are better people to care for her than you." Sophie picked up Molly in her arms, feeling her heart race with joy. "Welcome to the family, little girl." Molly nestled against her, letting out a small, contented sigh. As the sun shone over the ocean, one thing became clear to everyone. The storm had passed, and a new chapter was beginning. The sea had separated this family, but love and courage brought them back together. The dogs in this story found a new beginning because someone chose to see beyond abandonment and act with compassion. Now, it's your turn to make a difference. Like, share, and subscribe to spread this message of empathy and respect for animals. Together, we can inspire more people to protect innocent lives, fight cruelty, and create a world where every living being receives the care and love they deserve.